My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are honored and delighted to have with us tonight Professor Geoffrey Cohen from Stanford, who will be talking to you about his new book, Belonging: The Science of Creating Connections and Bridging Divides. Welcome, Professor Cohen.
Oh, thank you, Charlene, for such a gracious introduction. And thank you, everyone, for coming here. It's really just a privilege to be here and to share some of this work. Hopefully, I'm sharing. I'm going to share my screen here and then do a little slideshow. And just bear with me. And so I assume if you can't see, yes, if folks can see that.
Yes, just
Okay, fantastic. Um, so this work is really a communal effort. I'll just be talking about a lot of the science around the psychology of belonging, which comes out of the field of social psychology and developmental psychology. And I'm here mainly as a curator. I'm going to share what I think is just the most useful and perhaps underutilized work research that's been conducted over the past several decades that I think is very helpful, very helpful. Social psychology is among the most useful of social sciences because it not only seeks to understand human nature, but it seeks to find tools and strategies and insights that help us to activate human potential. And the work that I've focused on is on belonging, and belonging is such a human need, the need to belong. The word belong actually means to go with other people. And I just love that because, as a species, we are wired to go through this life with other people together in common purpose. So much so, research by Matt Lieberman and Naomi Eisenberg suggests that when we experience exclusion, even from people we don't know, even in a little silly computer game, the regions of our central nervous system associated with physical pain are actually activated. Exclusion hurts. And even down to our genes, our genome responds differently as a function of whether we've been excluded for a prolonged period of time. And that makes sense. As human beings, we're fairly vulnerable, fairly edible out there in the wild, and we really do need other people to survive and thrive. And this idea of belonging is kind of to go with. It's the sense of being part of a larger group to whom you matter, and that matters to you. And it's a very, very human state. And it really, really does matter. To give you one example, this is some research by Shannon Brady and colleagues. She did a national survey of college students, representative sample of over 10,000 students. And she was interested in what is the biggest, most statistically reliable predictor of whether college students persist through a four-year college. And she had one of these huge regression equations. You can kind of create a big algorithm essentially where you have GPA, first generation status, various indicators of risk, and you could put all those into the predictive model and ask which is the most statistically reliable. And the answer, it turns out, is students' response, their numerical response to a single question. And that question is, I feel like I am a part of this school. I feel like it's a home for me. That was the most powerful predictor of whether kids persisted through college. And an abundance of research suggests that that sense of connection to a place or to a person is among the most protective factors against risk and psychological harm and ill-being. The challenge we face today, especially in our fractured world, is that there are so many forces at work dividing us and fraying our social connections. And those range from systemic exclusion to war, to the pandemic, to political polarization, huge forces that divide us.
Professor Cohen, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second. The slide is blank. It's
That's
just
okay. Yeah, that's okay. That's
okay.
thanks.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no worries. I like empty space. This is sort of the Taoist slide of just emptiness. Um, so, uh, uh, but in spite of the big forces that divide us, research suggests that every day down on the ground, we have the capacity to create or nurture belonging, sometimes in seemingly small ways that can have whopping effects. And how can we do this? Our ability to create connection, even in divisive situations, almost like a superpower, I feel like. And the way that this happens is through changes to the situation. In every situation that we share with other people, we have the capacity to change it, sometimes just a little bit, sometimes just a lot, so that it's conducive to everyone's feeling like they belong. It's not easy, but as shepherds of a diverse society today, as parents, as educators, as mentors, I really do feel like this is a kind of key skill set for our era, the ability to create situations conducive to a sense of belonging for all. The skill set, the name of the skill set is what we call situation crafting. And this just refers to the art and science of creating opportunities to belong in social situations. And as you'll see from some of the research, nothing is too small. Almost the smallest of gestures can make a big difference in people's experience of the situation and their sense that they belong. For instance, a smile or simply making eye contact. There's this brilliant research by Harry Reese showing that when people pass a stranger on the street and they make eye contact rather than not, after experiencing the person who makes eye contact with them, they feel more connected to the rest of humanity. These little things can make a big difference. What I want to talk about is three strategies for for of situation crafting that I think are among the most important. And these are kind of strategies, they're principles. What I'm going to do is describe the principle, the general strategy, but then show you an example of research or a practice that just kind of shows how you do it. Because I think a lot of times when you just simply hear the lesson or the principle, it kind of slips through your fingers because we don't have a sort of concrete procedure or strategy for how to accomplish it in social situations. And I think the research really kind of illustrates not only the power of the principle, but the how of doing it down on the ground in challenging situations. So the first strategy is discovering or creating opportunities to express a belief in people's potential. So that sounds sort of obvious on the face of it. We should express and affirm a belief in people's potential. But it turns out that we don't do that as often as we can. The research here is both a story of the potential of these strategies to effect benefit and to help people, but it's also a story of missed opportunity. We often don't do these things nearly as much as we could or we should. So here's an example of one way to do that. And it was an experiment that David Jager and my colleagues did with seventh grade students of color, students of color, given because of, as research by Claude Steele and others suggest, often experience a lot of uncertainty as to whether they belong in school because of widely propagated stereotypes about their ethnic group, and those stereotypes can undermine their sense of belonging. This was a little experiment we did with seventh grade students. These are Black students, and they simply wrote an essay for their teacher, their seventh grade social studies teachers, and the intervention was simply a note that teachers appended to the critical feedback that they gave to their students. And that note said, I'm giving you these comments because I have high standards and I know that you can meet them. And that was it. But now from the student's point of view, the critical nature of the comments, the criticism suddenly kind of invert in meaning, and they actually mean this person actually believes in me. They're affirming a belief or a faith in my potential. It shifts the meaning of the criticism so it's less hurtful and more inspirational. Then I'm sparing you a lot of methodological details, but then we just looked at how many students did that thing we always want them to do when we give them critical feedback, dusted off their boots and tried again. And here we're just looking at the percentage of students who revised their work. In the criticism only condition, those students who got the criticism from their teachers, along with whatever typical positive feedback that the teachers typically gave their students, only 17% revised their essay. But for those students who got this note expressing a belief in their potential to reach a higher standard, 72% revised their work. Now you can imagine as a teacher feeling like I'm giving my kids all this feedback, but they're not revising their work. And you might kind of start to entertain different explanations for why that's happening. And very few of them, I think, would involve this possibility that, oh, maybe it's something I'm how I'm giving the criticism. And maybe there's a different way in which I could give it that would make a big difference in terms of the kid's motivation to act on what suggesting that they incorporate. So that's one example, 17% to 72%. This work has been shown and extended and replicated with other groups, including ethnically underrepresented college students, women in STEM tracks, getting that belief in someone's potential, getting an expression of a belief in your potential can sort of activate, help people to feel like they belong and avail themselves of the opportunities for growth and learning that are in the situation. One thing that I like to emphasize in this study is that, well, what's going on in the control group when they're getting only criticism? Why aren't students getting that message already? And then what I think this research suggests is that we must be missing a lot of opportunities to express our faith in people's potential, a lot of opportunities that we're missing because this, for one note to make a difference, it suggests that, in everyday life, students aren't getting this message nearly as much as they could or should. Okay. Another strategy is to discover or create opportunities to affirm what's called people's self-integrity. Self-integrity refers to a sort of core self-belief, almost like a kind of unconditional regard people have for the self. It's not just self-esteem, it's that sense that I am a kind of globally good person, that I am okay in some deep fundamental way. Carl Rogers would call it unconditional self-regard. One key strategy for cultivating belonging isn't just discovering and creating opportunities to express a belief in potential, but creating situations that sort of open an opportunity for people to express who they are and to feel valued for it. And there's many ways to do that. For instance, just simply expressing appreciation or gratitude for someone. There's work by Sarah Algiers that shows in the context of relationships, married partners, just having one of the partners or both of the partners carve out some time each day to express what they appreciate in the other person dramatically increases their satisfaction with the relationship and increases the amount of time they spent with one another by a full hour each day. A little act of appreciation is one way to affirm someone's self-integrity. Another very well-researched way is through having people reflect on their core values. And here's a little writing activity that was developed by Claude Steele, my colleagues, and myself over the years, and it's known as values affirmations. It's a way to affirm people's sense of self-integrity. And with this writing activity, which I've made available at my website, what you do is in a stressful situation, you ask people to complete this writing activity in which they take some time out. It's like a psychological timeout where they first identify their most important values, which are presented here in a list, in which they circle 2 or 3, and then they write about why those values are important to them. And it's a way, especially in a stressful or threatening situation, to reground oneself. I may be going through a difficult time here. I may be experiencing a lot of strained relationships with friends or family. I might have just gotten a bad grade back, but what gives me integrity, what grounds me, what roots me is what I deeply value, my relationships, my religious values. Those root me. And so I'm less likely to be sort of tossed about by the slings and arrows of everyday life. Then once people identify their core values, they take some time to write about why they're important. And here's some examples of written responses from, I've read hundreds of these over the years, from people who have engaged in this little practice of affirming the self through reflecting on what they stand for, and what they might even die for. And you can see from these examples, people are writing about some pretty powerful things. And the intervention, the activity takes about 10 minutes to complete, but even though it's brief, even though it's small, it's, as you can tell, very psychologically large. People are bringing to the fore these very deep abiding values that they hold and that they might not in an everyday school context or work context or even a family context, have the chance to assert. And what this intervention does is kind of creates an opening for people to say, this is who I am, and to feel fully seen. We've done it with having people take pictures and captioning them. Take a picture of something that symbolizes your values in day-to-day life, and then write about why they're important. And here's some examples of what people write. Chester is my everything. I love him the most. The odd thing about this picture I've noticed is that there's a second cat in the picture. This is just to show how you can kind of marshal many different ideas or activities. This is just one example to help people, including teenagers, including children, to feel seen, to help them to nurture that sense of self-integrity that's so important for navigating the inevitable setbacks of school and of life. Okay, so what is the effect of this little activity? We've looked at many studies. This is an overly ambitious slide. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but I just want to show you, this is in our control groups across many different studies. And here's the first slide, the one that's circled is just the most choice example for this context. This is teenagers' grades in school. In middle school, beginning of sixth grade, teens' grades and motivation takes a hit. There's a sort of downward spiral. Middle school, Jackie Eccles, a famous psychologist, educational psychologist wrote, what is middle school doing to our children? Nobody quite knows what's going on during these middle school years, but too many kids take a negative turn. This is in our control group among kids who in the beginning of the sixth grade or in the beginning of the seventh grade didn't completed a sort of neutral writing activity. Now, for a separate group, a randomly sampled group, they took some time, just 3 or 4 times at the beginning of sixth grade and 3 or 4 times at the beginning of seventh grade to write about their most important values using that activity I showed you. And what we find is that that little experience eliminates the downward trend in grades. And it's like a little sort of trickle effect over time. It begins as a very small effects, but the small effects compound. And I really do feel like this is one of the tragedies of social life, that we often touch people's lives through words we say or the small things we do for them in both for good and for ill, but we just never see the consequences of it. They're kind of hard to discern over great lengths of time, but sometimes in the right time, in the right place, a word of assurance, an acknowledgement, an expression that I see you and I believe in you can make all the difference and shift a trajectory so that people have a very different destination from the one that they would have otherwise had. I've done this research over the years, and I just keep being just blown away by how under certain circumstances, a little bit of encouragement at the right time, say a stressful transition, can have like a domino effect, a big consequence on people's opportunities and lives. Here's just as an example of the breadth of the effect, the percentage of students going to four-year college. Again, we see the strongest effects for ethnic minority students. For them, African-American students, the percentage of them going on to a four-year college 5 years after the activity has ceased jumps from 47% to 67% as a result of completing these activities. No one is saying that these little activities will make all the difference in the world. I think it really depends on them being situated in a place with resources. I'm getting criticism. I'm in a school environment where the teachers believe in me and will help me. Then, if I'm psychologically disencumbered, I'm affirmed, I feel seen, that can help me to take advantage of these opportunities I might otherwise be too fearful to embrace on my own. Okay, last one, I'll just go through this quickly, is creating opportunities or discovering opportunities to share stories of adversity. Now, I just don't think we do this enough. Brene Brown talks about this. Disclosure, vulnerability can be a very powerful bonding agent. And I remember growing up as a kid, my father was a theoretical physicist. He never shared any kind of feeling of adversity or difficulty, but and so when I would have my own, I would feel sort of unique and not quite normal when I was going through difficulty. But then, as a contrasting example, in graduate school, I remember my advisor said to me once that, he said, there's been some times when I was in graduate school when I felt like I was going to drop out and leave. And I was like, really? And that little story that he shared of his own experience helped me to feel normal. Like my misery isn't unique to me. I'm normal. And it gave me hope. Like I could get through this because he got through it. So Greg Walton, David Jager, many others, and I have created an intervention, but the intervention is just an example of the overarching principle of creating and sharing opportunities to share stories of adversity. It's called the social belonging intervention. Long story short, what we do is we have more senior people, people who are further down the pipeline, share stories of the adversities that they confronted during a difficult transition. So, for example, the college transition. We have a very diverse set of students share stories about how it was very difficult at first, their first year of college. They felt like they didn't fit in. They felt like they didn't belong. But with time, they found a home. But it took work. And here's some strategies for how they did it. And I'm sparing you a lot of details. It's about a 45-minute intervention. It can be made even shorter. But the key idea is to help people understand that they are not alone in their misery. It's normal to feel like you don't belong during a difficult transition. We are all faking it until we make it. And I think that message is so powerful for people to hear, especially when they see themselves or feel seen as outsiders. And just knowing that, oh, white people, Black people, Asian people, Latino people, Native American, everyone is feeling this struggle to belong in some ways helps people to feel normal. And the stories here give them hope, a sense of possibility for making it better. To make a long story short, this story sharing intervention, like all these interventions, which have been replicated at large national studies, have been found to have a range of benefits, including improving students' grades and retention, closing achievement gaps based off of race, class, and gender, improving student health and well-being, reducing disciplinary problems in adolescence, and increasing civic engagement, and even later life and career satisfaction. They seem to do two things. Hearing these stories does two things. First, it roots people so that they're less thrown off. If something bad happens, they don't globalize it and think they don't belong, because they have this sort of psychological armor or shield that protects them from that inference. The second thing it does is it seems to promote mentoring, lasting mentoring relationships. So what happens is if I feel like I belong and my nervousness is sort of common, I'm more likely to kind of put myself out there and ask for help, or maybe join a lab group, or knock on a professor's door, talk to my parents about something that's bugging me. It nurtures relationships. It kind of turbocharges them so that kids are more likely to do it, especially those kids who feel excluded. And in a lot of these studies, I've been really moved by how the intervention, this activity, has created lasting mentoring relationships. There was one student, low-income first-gen student, who described how after she graduated, she went to grad school, had a poster for a conference in Greece for her dissertation, and her college mentor flew all the way to the conference to see her. And so a little thing isn't so little after all. A little thing can be like a spark that causes a chain reaction, and the whole system responds to reinforce that initial moment of transformation. So that are three principles and three practices. And what I intend this as is, general principles that I think are really important. Expressing a belief in what people can become, helping people to feel fully seen, like they have a sense of integrity, and then helping them to give them a roadmap for navigating the adversities of their lives. And there's so many ways to do this. And I truly believe that what these activities are just an example of a larger set. They kind of do what exceptional teachers and mentors, and when we are all at our best as caregivers, do in our day-to-day lives, which is to help people to feel like they belong in sometimes small ways. And it's an organic process. And just to make that point vividly, I wanted to show you, this is the last slide I have, of an exceptional teacher in action. This is Yvonne Devons Hutchinson. And she's working in this classroom, and I think she's applying a lot of these principles in vivo, and it is like art to watch her. It's like art to watch her. So just to set it up, they've read a story about a deaf character who can't hear, and the teacher knows that one student knows sign language. One shy student knows sign language. And so that's the setup. And this is very brief. It's just about a minute and a half, but watch closely because there's no, unlike the movies, there's no soundtrack for these amazing moments.
Nice. I'm gonna ask you, could you do sign language? You said you study sign language. Could you sign that for us? No. Stop. Could you? Okay, help her, Tiffany. Read that description. Read the description. Can you do it for us? Stand up so it can.
Where is the description?
You don't want to stand up?
Oh.
Okay. Because everybody needs to see you. Go come stand by me.
I could spell it.
I can spell it. I like that. I like that. That's insightful. That what he got from him, he gave it back to him. He threw it back at him.
It's like he was like rejecting the gift. Like if somebody gives you something, like you find it offensive, you just like throw it back in their face.
Like he gave him a stolen item. Yeah, it was like he stole something and gave it to him as a gift.
Okay, so let's see. Read the description. You gonna sign for?
All I could think to do when I recovered a bit was to rip off my apron, make a fist with my right hand with the little finger up, and move it toward my chest, the sign for I. Then placing the first two fingers of my right hand in my left hand, immediately snatching the two fingers out again, I signed, I quit, and was out the door.
Wow.
I mean, I don't know about you, but to me, this is an awesome clip. And, you know, on the face of it, what the teacher does seems hardly eventful. I mean, it's almost like one of these interventions that I showed you. It seems like so low level and subtle. And I think the teacher's genius really lies in doing these small things that speak volumes. She affirms a student by knowing that she speaks sign language, right? And letting her bring that strength into the classroom. She supports the student in the face of adversity. When the student hesitates, the teacher says, hey, come stand by me. Stand by me. Love that. And then all the while the teacher maintains high standards. She doesn't let the student disengage, but she kind of moves away a little bit subtly when the kid starts to sign on their own, kind of helping her to have that sense of agency while also at the same time feel like she belonged. It's really artistry. And so I just think that this clip reminds us of two things. One is that little things can make a big difference. Sometimes the small, maybe nothing is too small. Of course, we're going to fail sometimes. We're not going to make the difference we hope to make, but down on the ground every day, in spite of these big forces that divide us, I really do believe the research gives us a kind of strategy and a guidebook for hope. And the second thing I think the clip reminds us of, and all these interventions that we've discussed is that education, to educate, the etymology of to educate, interestingly, doesn't mean to pour in, like pouring in knowledge and skills as we tend to think of it. In fact, the original Latin root for educate is to draw out, And I just think that a lot of times what we're doing as caregivers and what we're doing in this research and what we're doing everywhere with one another as friends, partners is bringing out that inner beauty into the outer world. And we can all do this every day. I really do believe that. Thanks. And I just want to thank my colleagues and you all for listening.
Well, thank you, Jeff Cohen. That was really beautiful. And I want to start out by saying that people are really, really getting it. Like, there's a beautiful comment from one of our attendees here who says, these ideas could help bring more peace and harmony and happiness to our children. Look at this is the best part about technology, these floating hearts. Thank you, everybody. I wanted you to know, Jeff, this is unusual. You have touched something in everybody just in that 30 minutes. This is amazing. I am personally a little worried about the other cat that's Chester's friend. Just saying.
Yeah, I really empathize with that cat.
I know. All right. So first question, what got you interested in studying belonging? Were there personal experiences in your life that drew you to this subject? I love social psychology, but I'm really curious about how you found this.
Hmm. You know, in retro, it's a story that you can kind of make up after the fact to some degree in our lives, like kind of tell a narrative. But yeah, I think there's two things. One is, I always, I think, especially as an adolescent, felt like an outsider. I know, I don't really look maybe as different in the conventional ways, but I do feel I've always had that sense of, not fully fitting in. And I don't really put it that way at the time for a long time, but I think a lot of the research that I've done and my colleagues have done over the years are kind of just exploring that, exploring a kind of a vulnerability that I had, but it's a vulnerability that we all share. I really do believe we've all been there. We all know what it's like not to feel like we don't belong. So ironically, that sense of being different is something that unites us. So that was one thing. And then the second experience I had was working for a fantastic mentor named Claude Steele, who really just was doing groundbreaking research at the time on similar topics and really encouraged me as a mentor to pursue a lot of these ideas and a lot of this research. So research is me search, but you get there with other people.
I've been in psychology my whole life and I've never heard that line. That's fantastic. I want to say, Jeff, it reminds me, we're doing a new neurodiversity speaker series, and it's been really wonderful. But there's a great educator named Sam Drazen, and he talks about equity versus inclusion. He says, equity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance.
Nice.
And that's kind of what you're saying, is we really all want to get asked to dance, right?
Inclusion is about being asked to dance. Is all equity is about being invited to party, and belonging is a sense of is the experience which comes from lived reality of feeling okay and feeling like you belong and feeling like you're accepted as you dance. That no one's gonna make fun of you for the way you dance, maybe as part of it. As part of it.
Right. And as you started with, some of these interventions seem so simple, right? And again, you talk a lot about them in your wonderful book. And for me, this was like a wonderful path through my education in psychology. It's just amazing. Everybody, if you're interested, the book reads, well, Dr. Cohen's a wonderful writer, but it just is so rich and full of all these examples. And I could tell you're all excited about this topic, so go for it. Professor Cohen, U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy says that loneliness is as dangerous as smoking, says we have a crisis of belonging. Can you talk about how belonging and uncertainty impact physical health, especially for our youth?
Yeah. Well, one of the most toxic environmental risk factors, is loneliness. Vivek Murthy has it right. That Harvard study featured in that book, The Good Life. They've documented this. The big predictor of a very big predictor of longevity and health is social connection. Mm-hmm. So it really is. And nobody quite has their finger on why, but I think, again, going back to what I said initially, is that as a species, we're kind of wired to belong because we know deep in our brain that when we're alone, we are under threat. And so what tends to happen is that when we feel isolated, that subjective sense of isolation, especially, our kind of the old dinosaur brain sort of activates the threat response. We know we're vulnerable, and things happen even at the genomic level, such that the genes responsible for protecting us against bacterial infection, like wounding, are activated, and the genes responsible for protecting us against viral infection to compensate are less activated. That's research by Steve Cole. Like it's a whole loneliness, a whole body response, and the body is getting ready for threat when we feel alone. That's good in the short term, but over the long term, when the body goes through that, when the threat system is chronically activated, it causes a lot of weathering, causes a lot of anxiety, causes a lot of depression. And I think that's part of where we are in a society. As you know, I think roughly about 25% of people suffer from loneliness that's so extreme that it is doing damage to their bodies that is commensurate with smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. So it does impact our physical health, but there's little things we can do to take some agency in creating connection, even for ourselves day to day.
Well, we had with us last Friday, actually, Dr. Jeremy Nobel, whose new book and project is literally Project Unlonely. And his premise is and has been for decades that creativity and art connect us. And I love that. He has the Foundation for Art and Healing as a way to combat loneliness. I don't think it seems obvious, but once you read about it, it makes sense. Yeah.
I think so. I think art really brings us together. It serves a common, it helps us identify our kind of some of the universal experiences. Mythology is like that. I think F. Scott Fitzgerald said that literature and stories, you kind of, by reading them, you learn that your longings and your hurts and your pains are to some degree shared. It's like you too. And you feel, you understand that they're not unique to you, that they're to some degree universal. And he even said, you feel like you belong. You feel like you belong when you read literature. So I do agree.
See, like he said, gardening is really just long-term performance art.
I like that. That's good.
That was really good. Also, I want you to know we should feel better. Julie just wrote in and said Chester is her cat. So I think that means Chester is okay. Julie, we appreciate that.
Noticed he was there. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. All right. Jeff, we are in an audience of primarily parents and caregivers, but obviously also educators and mental health professionals. Does the sense of belonging and the way caregivers foster it differ at varying points in a child's development? And if so, how? Like little kids, middle-sized kids, big kids.
Well, the lesson of the 20th century is that with little 20th century research is that with little kids, love and play and attachment are very important. With little kids, for sure. And I know that sounds obvious, but it was not always obvious. It was not always obvious. It's thanks to research by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, post World War II, around that era, that through that research, we came to realize that attachment and feeling like someone's got your back from an early age, even from birth, is very important for healthy adjustment. That was the lesson of the 20th century research. And a lot of the practices that we take for granted today, like letting a mother who just gave birth to her baby hold her baby right away, that seems like obvious. Why wouldn't you do that? But that was not always done. It's thanks to that research that we do it now. It's routine. I think the lesson of the 21st century, where we're kind of moving, is that, yeah, that need to belong continues throughout the lifespan. And it does take different forms. I mean, of course, we always need love. Of course, we always need that. In addition, I do feel like research, especially, some research, by a lot of developmental psychologists, David Yeager, Jackie Eccles, many suggest that the game changes in the teenage years. And I'm a parent. I've experienced this firsthand. The game changes. And what I think is most important in the teen years is two things. One is just being available. You may not always be called upon as a parent. You may not always be solicited for your advice, but when kids know you're there, they'll come to you when there's some unexpected adversity or trouble, especially if they don't feel like they're going to be judged. Research on that is called, there's this research called invisible support, which suggests that a lot of times what really helps us just get by is that sense that is kind of support that's just out there that we don't really see. And a lot of times support is salutary to us, even if we don't use it. It's just kind of there, and we know we have a sort of safety net. So I think that's really important. One is just being available, being a non-judgmental presence, so the kids, especially today, kids, a lot of these problems that they're going through, a lot of the challenges, they're very different from the ones I experienced, and you want them to come to you if there's a problem. The second is what's referred to in the literature as perspective getting. And this is a term coined by Nick Epley, does some wonderful research on this. Here's the gist. We are way too confident in our ability to read other people. We think we just have to imagine their point of view, including our kids, including our relationship partners. And so we don't take the time to get their perspective by just asking them for their questions. And Nick Epley shows this in a series of lovely studies where he brings couples together, romantic couples together, and they don't even bother, I'm simplifying, they don't even bother asking about their preferences, say for a camping trip or various plans. And as a result, they're pretty relatively empathically inaccurate in estimating what their partner thinks. But if you do one thing, you have them just ask their partner for their point of view. You know, what kinds of things are you interested in doing this weekend or weekends in general? They become a lot more accurate. So perspective getting is something that we don't do enough, especially with our kids. Hey, what are you going through? How can I support you? Are there any circumstances that you want to talk about? I am here. And I think that that is so key. And a quick call out to some research by Curly Ander and Carol at Irvine. They, long story short, they did this perspective getting intervention with low income first gen students at college, where they simply took the time to ask the first gen students, hey, what would help you? And the first gen students said, more faculty contact and more strategies on how to improve. And then they implemented an intervention, very simple, just two emails from the instructor, where the instructor said, hey, here are my office hours, just a reminder, come to see me, and here's some strategies for how to do better. And most of the time in educational interventions, the effect sizes are about 0.2 standard deviations if you have a respectable effect. In that study, it was a full 1.0 standard deviation effect of that treatment. It had a whopping effect. That's the power of perspective getting, availability and taking the time to ask questions and listen to the answers.
That's really amazing. We had with us again last week, Dr. Kendall Bronk from Claremont, and she studies purpose. And one of her most powerful interventions is literally having kids write to 5 adults they know and say, what do you think I'm good at? How am I going to leave my mark? And what are my strengths? And that little intervention is eye-opening, and the kids love it.
That's
They
great.
love being asked to identify what they think their purpose is.
I think that's another great question to ask. I think so many of these things are about questions. So we have availability, perspective getting, but also asking questions that awaken new facets of identity, we could say.
Yeah.
What is your purpose? What are your values? And that example that you gave is a great example of that, of something we just don't do enough of, I think. Really kind of asking those sort of deep questions, especially, of each other. And purpose turns out to be a bomb against loneliness. When you have a sense of purpose, even if you're feeling lonely, it's very protective health-wise. In fact, it's if you could put a sense of purpose in a bottle, it would be a zillion-dollar pharmaceutical industry. When people have a sense of purpose, actually their health is better. It's called eudaimonic well-being, and that genomic response that I mentioned earlier, where your genes are kind of activating bacterial protection and down regulating viral infection, that sort of goes away when people have a sense of purpose. And even in interventions that manipulate it, just do something kind for other people that serves a pro-social purpose, they see pretty strong health effects. So having that sense of purpose, and also reflective writing is really good for this too, because I think a lot of times people really are enacting a life aligned with purpose every day, including our kids, but they're not taking the time to reflect and make meaning out of that. And so journaling turns out to be a really effective intervention, encouraging people and ourselves to take some time every day and think, how did I live a life today that was, what were some of the things I did that were aligned with my values? And that's why that sort of picture intervention, I think, is so effective, is to help people to kind of see their everyday routines in a kind of through a value lens.
I just love that, Jeff. That's just brilliant. I have a 2-year-old granddaughter, and she loves Where's Waldo, but she's kind of too little. So my son has taught her to make her little fingers into a little frame and then to zero in. And I think it's something we can do with our kids, right? To kind of help them focus like that, like you're saying.
I love that metaphor. That's great.
It's cute, isn't it? All right. Not surprisingly, because we have a very special audience for you tonight, we have some wonderful questions. So we're going to turn to questions from you, our audience. Keep them coming, but these are beautiful. They're not easy, Jeff, but we know you're up to the challenge. Okay. Question: do you have guidance on how to support kids in the classroom and at home when they feel they're being attacked or bullied at school?
Well, there are most of the things schools do to discourage bullying and aggression in the teenage years don't work. And they typically take the form of anti-bullying information campaigns. Don't do this. Here's a role model emphasizing these things, emphasizing good behavior and collegiality. Most of the things don't work. There are two things that do work in the literature. One is a growth mindset. So this is something that schools can do. As a parent, I think it's a little trickier, but we could address that maybe later. But what schools can do is they can promulgate what Carol Dweck, David Jager, and others call growth mindset. And really helping people to understand that we are all works in progress rather than final products, finished products, and creating a kind of interact, especially I think these growth mindset interventions where the kids are kind of doing it, they're kind of rehearsing, thinking through ways in which they can say things or respond to situations differently through simulations with that mindset. Those I think are especially effective. And what they found is that when kids go through an experiment that helps them to internalize a growth mindset around, this idea that people can change, they are less likely to bully other people and less likely to retaliate against bullies. So that's one thing, a growth mindset, really helping people to not make judgments about other people that are too fast and too facile. So that's one. And then the second is affirmations, I think, helping people have that sense of self-integrity, because a lot of times we find that bullying and aggressive behavior is actually, it's due to insecurity. I mean, no, reasonable person, people act out in order to make themselves feel better. They put other people down to lift themselves up. We're all kind of little elitists in this way, and it really can be pretty toxic in the teenage years. So affirmations have been found when they're introduced as a classroom exercise to really bring people together. And then the third and final one are these sort of cooperative group learning things where programs where you kind of bring students together to work together on projects of common purpose. And it could be a lesson plan. We're all going to work together to do this. When I was a camp counselor, if two kids were fighting, I said I would have them like clean up the bathroom together, cooperate. So it turns out that cooperation in pursuit of common goals is the best way to bring people together, even if they're in a divisive relationship. So those are three things. Actually, I should also do a call out for restorative justice techniques, restorative justice. Sean Darling Hammond has a really nice set of findings on this, a really nice review. Restorative justice practices where you bring the victim and the perpetrator together to restore, to come to an understanding and an acknowledgement of the harm done, rather than a more punitive policy. When those kinds of programs are implemented as a school norm, they seem to be really effective at reducing bullying. So I got to 4 examples there.
Okay, that's really great. Wonderful examples. So here's a parent asking about, speaking of examples, can you share an example of how parents can help affirm self-strategy for their kids? They're wondering, whether are they just going to get the eye roll when they try doing some of the great exercises you suggested? So question around any ideas for helping our kids do these affirming self-strategies?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I have my kids do it. They liked it. They liked it, like these exercises, but you can try it. I think everyone's different. Like take some time to write about your values. I have a number of these activities up on my website. I think they're worth trying, and maybe they'll roll their eyes. Maybe they won't. It's all in the framing though. You don't want to be like, oh, there's some exercise I heard about, blah, blah, blah. You want to be like, yeah, this is a really interesting topic. I've thought a lot as a parent about my values, and I think it's just, something that we can all think about as a family. So I think framing those activities in the right way can be really effective. And I've done it. You can have conversations about values and ways in which you're cultivating, or ways in which you're trying to live a life aligned with your values with your kids. One thing that affirming the self, I think also just taking the time to ask people for their perspective. I want to hear more about, ways in which we can make family life better for you. My father would always take a day every year, it's just once a year, like, have any advice for us as parents? It's like, really? It's like, I feel seen and heard, and it's affirming. So there's many ways to do this. Also, I think just simply appreciation, like, what I really like about you as my son is that you are really, here's what I appreciate. I appreciate that you're so good at identifying what it is you want, and then figuring out strategies to go after it, and noticing, appreciating, attending to a person, seeing them, and then expressing an appreciation for that. No substitute for that.
Yes. And I think that parents think that kids are going to see through that. but when it's said authentically, I think they love it. I do it with my young adult kids.
Mm. Yeah.
It's great advice. It's great advice.
It's great. And I think a lot of times questions work better than, I mean, the inclination is always to kind of try to bombard people with, to tell your kids what to do. But I think good questions really can go a long way. Just, kind of, by the way, just as one example of this, there's some lovely research, I'll put it in the chat, by Judy Harakevich and Ashen, just showing that asking questions about, say, with your teenage kids about science, like, what did you learn today in science? And it might be like molecular polarity. Okay, oh, what was that? What is that? And then they describe it, and they're like, and then you ask a third question, which no one thinks to ask. How is that relevant to your personal life or something that you care about? Can you think of something? And then she has these sort of scaffolds for parents to kind of engage in these Socratic conversations, helping kids to personalize, make the subject matter personally relevant to them. And then they start thinking, oh, molecular polarity, that's really relevant to cosmetics, right? And aesthetics. And it's also relevant to medicine and creating better medicines for cancer. And I know someone who has leukemia. And so all of a sudden the science takes on a life, but it's through kind of questions. I'm not telling you why science is relevant to your life. I'm eliciting, I'm drawing it out in that classic sense from to educate. And they find these whopping effects, for instance, in parents who do this with their kids around science, their kids get better grades in science, and they're more likely to major in science, as I recall, in college.
Really good ideas. We're not set up to answer personal therapy questions, but I will just keep asking questions that I hope will give you some sense of how we can make things better for our kids. So here's a good one. Do you, Jeff, have any ideas for a single mom about how she can connect with her college-age son? He's living at home and working. And of course, he does not want to be living at home, but single mom.
Well, a single mom living at home with their kid, I think just doing activities together is really, one of the best things to do. I mean, so many things are just, I know this sounds a little simple, but I think taking the time to do things together that you both enjoy, just kind of even like little things, activities like taking a walk together or finding something that your kid enjoys doing and doing it together. People love doing things together, even little things. We found, for instance, that, when you bring people together to do these like little boring peg turning tasks in the lab, they hate it when they're by themselves, but when they're doing it with someone else, even a stranger, they're like, oh, this is kind of fun. So I guess that would be my number one bit of advice is to find things that you both like or that he likes and to kind of make plans to do it together every now and then. And and also just kind of being available. I really do feel like, just knowing, I love you. And if there's ever anything you want to talk about, I am here. I really, kind of opening the door for conversation. I think that's something that's easy to say, but harder to do.
I agree. When I was a single mom, we would go and in the afternoon after school, go to Starbucks and get something and just talk. Luckily, he was a talker, but just sitting down at a little table, not at home, really worked.
It really worked. I remember with my dad, we would, he was kind of a little distant kind of person, but we would always on Sunday do chores together, and I'd sit in the car, and he'd just love to drive, and that was our time to connect, and it worked.
See. So there are more questions here about encouraging belonging. I like this one. How do you encourage belonging with siblings who have very different interests, or where one is an introvert and one is an extrovert? So sort of that finding common ground.
One is an introvert, one is an extrovert. They're very different. I don't, that's a hard one because, well, recreation is great, fun, enjoyment, entertainment is fun. Finding things that kind of are mutually entertaining. I think that's one idea. I mean, I know my sister and I are really different, very, very different people, for example. And, one thing that we bond over doing things together, like going to the movies. Entertainment, the word entertainment actually means kind of to hold together. Isn't that interesting? To hold together, like entertainment kind of focuses attention on the same thing, same pleasurable thing. And think that might be one way to go. Also, creating opportunities to cooperate in pursuit of common goals. Kind of going back to the old research in social psychology showing that there's no substitute for contact and cooperation in pursuit of some goal that the two kids like. The shy kid might like something, going camping or going hiking, and maybe that aligns with something that the extroverted kid likes to do, and creating an opportunity for them to kind of do that together and to cooperate together. Perhaps meeting adversities together, or challenges. That's one very effective strategy. So that's what I would offer off the cuff.
Well, and I think it's like, I love the comment here from a parent who says, I ask my daughter from time to time if there's something I can do as a parent to be a better mom. There's a parent here who's struggling with an 18-year-old who just doesn't want to do anything, won't walk, won't talk.
Mm.
And I think that you go back to some of these things, like you said, asking more questions, trying to figure out what's going on. Yeah.
There's also something, we did a little study, this might be helpful for that kind of thing, on kind of going outside your comfort zone, especially for socially anxious kids. This was a study that I did with Punit Rousseau, and long story short, we created this sort of guide. I think it's up on our website. We created a sort of guided activity for young adults to identify something that was relevant to an activity relevant to their values, but that was a little bit outside their comfort zone. So kind of like a baby step. And then they were, they wrote down a few plans for how they were going to do it. And then over the next 2 weeks, they took that step, and we found these really large effects, especially for people who were kind of low in happiness, like who felt generally like their lives were in a rut. Those people especially really benefited from that comfort zone, going outside your comfort zone activity. So I think doing like a little thing, and often the things they did were social, like helping out with a charity even, or volunteering, or reaching out to a friend who was in need. A lot of the social stuff were the comfort activities that were selected, and they were also the comfort activities that were the most positive in their impact. And I think helping kind of so much of this, I believe, is not just the what of you do, but the how of you do it. And the how is like, you got to put people in a position of empowerment and agency. Like, here's an activity, think this through, set a little goal, and here's some sort of structured prompts for you to think through how you're going to accomplish these steps and arrive at your goal. Kind of setting that up in like little baby steps, I think it could be really helpful to get people outside their comfort zone and think through, what are your goals? How can we get there together? And here's a map for how to do that. That can be really effective. It's a little like that old, I'm a little like that old Bandura research, Al Bandura, where he's like, he gives kids, one group of kids, it's 12 math modules that you have to do over the next month. And then another group of kids, it's the same 12 modules, but he just says, you just have to do one a day. And the kids who get the one a day answer, even though they're doing objectively the same thing, they get further, they feel greater self-efficacy, and they learn a lot more. So breaking things down into baby steps, small proximal goals can be a really effective way to help people to get outside their comfort zone and maybe put themselves out there a little bit more than they're doing.
We are big fans of Al Bandura, Professor Cohen. All right. Well, the time has just flown by. We are at the end of our hour together, but I have a final question I traditionally ask, and you're somebody I want to ask this of more than anybody. That is, after everything you've seen and researched, and your dad, Jeff, what gives you hope?
Oh, wow, that's such a great question. Well, the research for sure. It really does suggest there's a lot more potential and opportunity passing us by every moment than we know. And a little change. It's almost like those little sci-fi movies where you go back in time, you change things just a little bit, and it has this domino effect. These things are happening all the time. That gives me hope. And then the other thing that gives me hope is I think people generally have pretty good hearts, in spite of all the disagreement and, problems in the world. There's, the golden rule, like do unto others as you would have done unto yourself if you were in their situation. I think 94% of Americans believe in that, the golden rule, being charitable, being kind. I think there's a lot of inner beauty in people, a lot of heart, a lot of good intentions. People really do like to connect, and they really do like to be good, and they really do like to be pro-social. That's kind of wired into us. We like it best when we're being harmonious with one another. I mean, yeah, sometimes we really like kind of clobbering verbally down on someone with whom we disagree, but there's a lot of good in people. And so the only trick is, how do you get that inner beauty out? And that's all about situation crafting.
Well, that was a beautiful answer to that question, Jeff. So far, I think that's the best one that we've had. So everybody, wonderful book from Dr. Geoffrey Cohen, Belonging, The Science of Creating Connections and Bridging Divides. Pick up a copy. But Professor Cohen, thank you so much for tonight's really brilliant discussion. We've inspired a lot of people, and I hope given people more help and more hope in their own families. So thank you for everything. We'll be reaching out to you again, looking at those resources that you suggested, and just really appreciate everything you've offered tonight. Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience tonight for being such great attendees and asking such wonderful questions. You really made us think, and we appreciate that. So take care, everybody. Thank you, Jeff Cohen. Hope to see you all soon. Good night, everybody.